well and truly demolished, where 15 people lived in the one room, ranging from a baby through to a grandparent, and the sort of conditions in that room, sort of no toilet facilities or anything else you can imagine. And I think that that is one particular graphic example of something that I saw in the early days that said to me, you know, something's wrong and something's got to be done about it. And from then on in, got involved in the Fire Brigade Union, and it flowed.
The word socialism often frightens people, rather. How would you define the ideal of socialism in a way that wouldn't necessarily frighten people?
Well, I mean, I think that one of the reasons why socialism frightens people is that we probably got the most unfair and unfree press in the Western world. And I think that they indoctrinate people on a daily basis that there's something wrong with socialism, there's something non-democratic about socialism, and linking socialism all the time to what's happening in Russia.
When you say unfree, though, that's implying that people aren't able to think for themselves.
No, what it's saying is that when 5 millionaires own 95% of the newspaper industry, it's highly unlikely that many of those millionaires are going to have sympathy with socialism. It's highly unlikely that many of those millionaires are going to have sympathy with what, for example, Liverpool City Council is doing at the moment in time. And obviously, when they're pumping out stuff every day, it must have an effect. I'm not saying people can't speak for themselves. What I am saying is that when stuff is pumped at you all the time on the television and in the press, obviously has an impact. And it didn't, there wouldn't be hundreds of millions of pounds spent on advertising per year as there is.
So how would you define socialism?
Well, I mean, I think that what we're seeing in this country at the moment is an example of a capitalist society, a society which is for the rich and against the poor, a society which says that free enterprise can work, is patently not working. And I think that sort of the panic measures being shown by the government and by the owners of industry, etc., is clear an example of that. And one of perhaps the worries of many of us within the Labour Party is that, yes, we'll work as hard as anybody to get a Labour government returned, but what we don't need is a Labour government like the last Labour government, which simply paved the way for Thatcher, paved the way for conservatism. The one largest single cut in public expenditure, for example, happened under James Callaghan when he was Prime Minister, and certainly we can't see that sort of situation again. And in the last Labour government, £25 million per day were pumped into private industry. And I think perhaps that's the most important one, because when you look at that £25 million a day, it didn't go into the sort of ailing shipyards, it didn't go into the factories that have now shut, it went into arts, antiques, investments abroad. And it's the old saying, you can't control what you don't own.
But in a way what you're saying is that socialism is not a lot of things. What is it positively? Well,
I mean, the last point I made there was that you can't control what you don't own. And I think that certainly we have got to acknowledge that capitalism is failing. We've got to acknowledge that the society which makes people live off the backs of others is failing for those people who most need most out of society. And I think that certainly we've got to say that if those industries, if the economy of this country cannot manage for the majority, and certainly cannot manage for a minority or the worst off, then we have to take some control of that. And that when you look at the sort of top 200 monopolies in this country that control something like 85% of the economy, 85% of the wealth, there is no way that in a democratic socialist country that you can actually see those staying in the hands of a few. And we have to say they have to be taken over in a democratic way. They have to be taken over by a democratically elected Labour government.
Would you say you have to be a Marxist to be a socialist?
I would say that Marxism was at the root of the early Labour parties, that if you read anything about the founding of the Labour Party, of Keir Hardie, etc., you will see very much there the basis of Marxism.
Also, the New Testament was very much at the basis, which is rather conflicting with Marxism.
Well, certainly, I mean, there are a lot of people who argue that Jesus Christ was one of the first Marxists around. A lot of people argue that Jesus Christ was a true socialist. Certainly, if somebody walked now into the church or walked into the House of Parliament and started kicking over tables of the money changers, in other words, kicking over the tables of the Bank of the City, they wouldn't exactly be given the OBE for it.
How would you define Marxism? Simply as being the process of taking over these 200 industries and nationalising control of industry generally?
It was once said that there was two choices, either Marxism or barbarism. I think we're in a position now where it's Marxism or nuclear annihilation. I think that we're in a position where, unless we see that the majority of people in this country, the majority of people in the Western world, are suffering under a small handful of people who are there just to milk it for their own ends and are not doing a good job even at doing that. Capitalism is falling around our shoulders. Of that there is no doubt. And we need to say now that we have to acknowledge that we have to go forward and have to control that sort of industry and economy which can only be for the benefit of mankind.
Now, to go forward, how revolutionary do you have to be? You see, you used the term democratic socialism just now, by which presumably you mean an electoral process electing by pluralistic means a socialist government. But if you can't get that through the electoral process, and you feel so sure, as you obviously do, that you have the right Marxist approach, shouldn't you perhaps think of shouldn't someone with your ideals think of abandoning the electoral process and going for revolutionary Marxism?
No question about it, no.
Why not?
Because there is no way that you can push forward the policies that we're talking about without having the majority of people on your side. That we fervently believe in democracy, passionately believe in democracy, and it's only as a result of going through the democratic process that you're going to get people on your side. I mean, for example, that what we showed in Liverpool was by putting forward clear socialist lines that people would come out and vote. As I was saying to you earlier on, that at the last elections, there was only one Tory marginal in the entire country that was won by Labour, and that was in Liverpool Broad Green, with a militant supporter. And I think that what we should be saying is that the policies that we've been putting forward, people can see are right, people can come out and willingly vote for them. And if that was repeated throughout the rest of the country, we wouldn't have had Thatcher in power now. We'd had a 100-seat Labour majority.
But this, what you're talking about now, really reveals what's at the heart of your problems with the Labour Party and Mr. Kinnock, because the sort of things that you stand for, nationalisation of 200 firms, including all the banks, abolition of the monarchy even, that's not going to get much electoral support, is it?
Well, you know, I mean, when we put forward policies, the fact of the matter is that it does get electoral support. I mean, only a matter of 3 or 4 weeks ago, an opinion poll was done in Liverpool with the attempt to try and show that the popularity of Liverpool had gone down. What it showed was that whereas in the last local elections 46% voted Labour, now 56% would vote Labour. When you compare that with the recent opinion poll that was taken between the popularity of Margaret Thatcher and Neil Kinnock last week, where they came neck and neck, and that's in midstream of a parliament, with Thatcher with 4.5 million on the dole and everything that goes with it, is absolutely scandalous. And also, of course, the Timebridge by-election, which is a terrible result for Labour. I think what we're seeing now is that people will respond to something that is appealing to them and they see as an alternative to the Tory government. And unfortunately, and I say this with regret rather than anger, they're not seeing the National Labour Party leadership offering that alternative at the moment.
But are you really saying that people who at the moment won't vote for what you would regard as rather a milk and water sort of Labour socialist policy are more likely, and vote for Thatcher instead, are more likely to vote for abolition of the monarchy and nationalisation of 200 firms and banks?
Well, you see, it's all very well throwing in bits now of what the programme is, that I think that it's interesting that when you knock on doors, people are concerned about housing, they're concerned about jobs, they're concerned about the services, they're concerned about their kids, they're concerned about what can be offered to them. And certainly the sort of policies we've put forward are those sorts of things that can offer an alternative. And clearly in Liverpool we've shown it works. I mean, if you walk into Liverpool now, you start seeing houses being built, good houses, gardens back and front, double glazing, council houses for people to live in. You see the situation changing. And that's done with just in one city. Imagine if that was done in a whole country. And that's the important thing. And to throw in something like the abolition of the monarchy, I mean, certainly I don't know very much about the Queen or Charles as individuals, and I've got nothing to say about them as individuals. What I would say is that there is always a danger that the monarchy with so much power can be used against a democratically elected Labour government. And certainly if we didn't say that, if we didn't predict that that was a danger, obviously we wouldn't be telling the truth.
But a very last question, doesn't all this show really that you're terribly constricted within the Labour Party, and isn't it unnatural for you to be within the Labour Party, and shouldn't you work on your own?
No, I mean, I've been in the Labour Party now for, what, 14, 15 years. I've worked probably for more right-wing Labour candidates than I have left-wing Labour candidates, and I will continue to work as hard as anybody to see a Labour government return.
Yes, but you haven't succeeded.
Well, we've succeeded in Liverpool. We've succeeded very much in Liverpool. We've now got a Labour authority that's got the mass support of the people in Liverpool and is showing that it can have electoral success.
And you think you'll get the mass support of the country now?
I'm sure that the lessons of Liverpool will be learned, and as I go around the country, more and more trade unions, more and more working people are saying that's certainly the way we think the rest of the country should go. And I think if it takes those lessons, I think we will see the Labour Party back in power at the next election with an overwhelming majority.